So, my name is Devin, and we have been going through at Grace Harbor. We've been going through this series through Joshua, and we've been going verse by verse. And so, what has happened at this point is we have crossed the river. God has given them the land, and now they have to conquer it. And last week, or a couple weeks ago, we heard the story of the Gibeonites and how they have deceived the Israelites into believing that they are this poor, ragged country or city that is kind of out of everywhere, and when in reality, after they make a treaty that they will not kill them, Israel will not kill the Gibeonites, we find out that they are a very wealthy, well-maintained, very large city, and in fact they do have a very large and strong, well-known army around them. So, gotcha. So, we're at this point, and God has promised Israel that He will give them the land that they see before them. And so that's where we're at this moment. They've been deceived. They're coming to terms with the fact that they didn't consult God on the issue, and their land should have been theirs anyways. But here we are. So, we're going to read the passage. Julia, can I steal that? I'm sorry. I'm going to read. I don't want to read out of my version out of my Bible because that's not what I gave you. All right, so we're going to read the verses, and it's long. I apologize. It's up here. If you don't have it in your hand, it's there. It's long. I'm going to read through it real quick. Now it came about when Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had utterly destroyed it. Just as he had done in Jericho with its king, so he had done with Ai and its king. And the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were within the land. That he feared greatly because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Therefore, Adoni-Zedek, king of Israel, sent word to Hoam, king of Hebron, and to Piram, king of Jarmuth, and Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon. Now, just for your information, I did look up like the actual pronunciations of names, and they sound nothing like I just said. So I apologize because that's just how it is. Saying, "Come up, Lachish," and Debir, king of Eglon, saying, "Help me. Let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua, with all the sons of Israel." So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, and the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered together and went up with all their armies and camped outside of Gibeon and fought against it. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua, the camp of Gilgal, saying, "Do not abandon your servant. Come up quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, and he and all the people of war with him, and the valiant warriors. There's another page, I kid you not, flip it over. The Lord said to Joshua, there's 15 verses, and they're long. I apologize. "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you." So Joshua came up upon them suddenly, marching all night from Gilgal. The Lord confounded them before Israel, and he slew them into a great slaughter at Gibeon. And they pursued them all by the way of the ancient Bethram, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. I'm so sorry. As they fled, if you know how to say these, I apologize to you already, fled before Israel. While they were at the descent of Bethram, the Lord threw large stones from heaven, hailstones, on them as far as Azekah, and they died. Man, there were more dead from the hailstones than those were the sons that the Israelites killed with their swords. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day. Now here's the very important part. The Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel, and he said in sight of Israel. So this is Joshua speaking. "O sun, stand still at Gibeon. O moon in the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves from their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jashar, The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down while the whole day. There was no day like this before or after, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man and the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua, all of Israel, with him, returned to the camp to Gilgal. Now, something for you all to know, I am dyslexic, so that is very difficult for me to do, and I apologize. So if you heard something different, you probably did. But here's the thing. This story is so important to us today because something happened here, something different, something that had never happened before happened. And it says it at the very end of that passage, it says that God listened to a man. It wasn't like God was like answering a prayer, but Joshua just says to God, you need to make the sun stop in order for what you said could happen will happen. And it did. Now, when I was reading these verses, I was thinking to myself, what are some things that you and I can take out of this? And I took 6 questions that we need to ask ourselves, and they're all in your notes, and there's some fill in the blanks and there's some not. But the first one is, are others around you aware of God's influence in your life? And is the enemy fearful of your influence? Now, I think what's interesting is that the 5 kings of the Amorites who are living in the hill country hear about all these things that the Israelites are doing, and they become fearful. Why? Because they understand the influence that they have. Not only because they are powerful, but because God is behind them. Like, there's a lot of them already, so it's kind of hard to match up number for number when an entire nation is moving across a desert just consuming things. But not only that, but it's the way that they're conquering these places. And the kings are looking, and they're saying, man, this is terrifying. And isn't it funny how the enemy looks at what is happening in Israel and they attack their friends instead? Right? They take the weakest point, they take the friendship, they take the bond, and they start breaking. I think if we look in our own lives and we see that God is influencing us, one of the greatest things that we can see and understand is that if we are being influenced by God and we are doing awesome things, the enemy is bound to attack you. They want to break you down. The devil just wants you to sit still and be quiet and not do what you're told. And sometimes the best way to do that is to attack the people around you. Attack the people that you care about. Because if they're not building you up, they can be tearing you down. And I think it's so weird that they do this, and it's really not that strange if you think about it. And really, God is setting up something so extraordinary that we have no comprehension of it. But our second point is, do our friends and family or other Christians come to us for advice? You can gauge this in your own life, obviously, by watching other people's lives and seeing things happen. Has anybody else in the room or the outside in the world, have any of you guys ever had that moment where a friend is going through something and they don't come to you or talk to you about it? I mean, it's like, it's a gut check. I remember when Jamie and I were in college, my best friend growing up, him and his girlfriend got pregnant. And I remember I was the very last person to find out about it. And I was a young pastor. It was my first year in ministry, and I just remember looking at it going, there's something wrong with this picture in my own life. There's something wrong when my best friend or my friends are going out and confiding in other people. And they look at me, and I remember asking him, why didn't you tell me? Because I was excited for him. I mean, regardless of what circumstance it happened, he's going to have a kid, and that's awesome. And I was so excited for him. And I was like, why didn't you tell me? He's like, I was afraid you're going to judge me. Like, we both grew up in the church. You and I both grew up doing the same thing. We volunteered and did all this stuff, and I was just afraid that, you were going to have a different opinion of who I was. And I was like, well, in 9 months I would have known anyways. But I said, I told Jamie, we were like 3 months into our first ministry, and it was tough for me. I mean, it was honestly one of the most difficult things that I'd ever had happen in my life. Someone so close to me just not wanting to confide in me because they're afraid of the reaction that I'd have towards it. And you know what that said about me was that my reactions prior to that were judgmental and not godly. And I think if you and I look at ourselves and we look and we have people coming to us, it's a good sign. It shows fruit of the labor that the Lord has put in you. But also, I don't mean that people come to you to like complain and like get all frustrated because you also like to pile on. Does anybody else have ever had that happen to you? That happens to me sometimes where I enjoy piling on. I'm like, oh, don't get me started. Just let me tell you. And then you go on and on and on, and God's sitting there like, what are you doing? I mean, in the story, just imagine these people are getting attacked, and Israel's in this kind of like weird relationship with them where they are bound by life. Like if they break this promise, God guaranteed will cut off another generation. So they have this option where they're like, okay, we gotta send help because they're the only ones that are going to help us. The Gibeonites are like, we gotta send out this thing. Please don't let your servants die. Don't let us just live out this life of destruction. And the Israelites have the option of saying, well, you got what's coming to you, right? Or they can go and help. And that's what they had to do. But it's because they had God in their lives speaking to them, walking with them, and they knew that there was something about a promise. There was something about a friendship that causes you to not judge them by what they've done, but care for them like the Lord had. So I threw in an extra point, and it's not in your notes, so you can write it down, because I like to do that too sometimes. Are you listening when God's speaking? I think it's hard for us to truly listen, especially now, especially in the time that we live in. We have so many distractions. We get in our car and the radio's on, and we get into the store and there's music on, and there's like screens in the store for us to watch while we're checking out because we're so bored with our lives all the time. Or we go to the gas station and there's a screen in there, and there's just distractions everywhere. I mean, I find myself in my house sometimes when I'm just alone, like sitting in silence, feeling jittery and like feeling weird, like I need music, or I need a show on in the background, or I need something to distract me from my thoughts. And really what I'm finding is that if I just take a moment and listen, God's going to speak to me. And I think sometimes we like over spiritualize this in our own lives, and I don't mean to offend you, but I think sometimes we feel like we need to like get in a cabin for like a week and like no like phones and no TV and sit for days fasting and like meditation and like just being alone with God, and that's when God's going to speak to us. And absolutely that can happen, but that's not how you live your everyday life, and you have to find a way in your own life to live in prayer. With every breath, with every moment, with every thought of like, that person just cut me off and now I want to, and then just pray. Right? Because there's so much distracting us. There's so much. We don't take time to listen. And I think another way that you can figure out if you're listening to God is, do you feel like God has a purpose for your life? Do you feel like there's a mission in your life that God is calling to you that is higher and greater and bigger than you can achieve? Because if so, then you've at least got the initial push. But if not, then we need to spend time in this Word. We need to start figuring out, God, what do you have for me? Not what do you have for Pastor Fred, not what do you have for Jamie, not what do you have for John. What do you have for me? God, I know that we are all supposed to be called to this great commission of going out to all nations and spreading your gospel, God, but what does that look like for me? What do I do with that? So we need to just take these moments and start listening to who God is and what he has for us. And then we get to this moment in the passage that's so absurd and so insane. First of all, let me read it to you guys. It says that as they were running away, stones started falling from the sky and started slaughtering the army. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed this in the Bible, but something happens when God moves and he does something. It moves like exponentially. Like, it is crazy. It just blows up. And it could take you and an entire army like months, days, years to accomplish something. And in a split second, God's like, boom, hail, pff, everyone's dead. And you're like, what? And that's the power of God. I mean, that's what we serve. That's what we live for. Why? Because God, in a breath, spoke and light came. He spoke and things happened. He speaks today and things happen. And that's the God that we serve. And so in one moment, God can do something so much greater than you. And then not only that, but then Joshua says, "O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon at the valley of Ajalon." And guess what happened? The sun stood still, and the moon stood still. And for some of you, and for me, sometimes I think about this and I'm like, he asked the wrong prayer. Like, the sun doesn't, like, it's the earth that moves, right? We understand that now. Like, the earth is the one that's moving and the sun is standing still and we're kind of going around it. So first of all, he prayed the wrong prayer because he doesn't know. But second, what's crazy is that I don't know, because there's so many biblical theories of what happened at this exact moment. I mean, maybe it was this natural phenomenon that where God just literally was like, wait. And just like turn the earth just a little bit, and it just stayed there. And next week we're going to be reading through what happened while this time basically stood still. Or maybe it's like a metaphor. Like sometimes in the Bible they talk about things that are happening, but it's metaphorical. It's not actually like what they say it is, but it's just something. But I would like to believe that our God who sent down a hailstorm to just kill a whole bunch of people, or our God who created things with just a breath, could just be like, wait just 1 second, and everything just stops. And it's this bold, like, ridiculous faith that Joshua has. Like, he doesn't just say it like under his breath like 99% of us would do. Like when he says this prayer, like, Lord, please let the sun stand still and the moon just stop. And then if it stops, we're like, I told you, I prayed it, everyone heard it, that was me. Because, right, we like to cop out. We like to just be like, well, it was not God's will to allow that to happen. So I guess, no, he is standing there in the midst of all these people, and he's shouting to God, God, let the sun stand still and the moon stay where it's at, because we need to accomplish what God has already put in place. Because isn't it interesting that in the verses, when God talks to Joshua, what does he say? He says, I have given it to you. This is past tense. When God speaks to us sometimes, he's like, it's already won. Why are you fighting a battle? Just go. Do what I've told you to do. God's speaking in past tense. I've already given them to you. Don't worry about it. Not one of them will stand. Not one. And yet I'm worried about, I don't know, groceries or gas, or our prices going up. Please, God, no, right? Like, we're worried about these things that in our own lives are very important. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely understand, and it is the very end of the month, and it was a long month, and it was very hot, so your electric bill is going up, and I get that, and we all need a miracle at some point in time. But there's something that Joshua does that's just almost audacious. It's almost ridiculous. He tells God what he needs to do. He's like, God, if it's going to happen, you got to do it. And what you got to do is just stop the sun. And it happens in that moment. And this book of Jashar, I looked it up, and it's just a lost book. It would have been a praise hymn of all the stories that happened to the Israelites while they were conquering all these nations, and it's mentioned again in 2 Samuel. It's really just a book that reiterates things that God has done, and then they would sing praises about it. It's a worship book, much like our worship songs where we sing about things that God has done in the past. But he says, isn't he? It's not even just here. It's also mentioned other places. God's not doing things just in small places. He's blowing up things. He's making things new all the time. And I think for us, I was listening to a pastor this last week, and he was talking about this crazy prayer that Joshua prays. And he's like, I think what we get out of this is that if your prayer can be answered by the things that you can do personally and not by God, then you're disrespecting who God is. If your prayers can be answered through your own means, then you're not praying the right prayers. I mean, there's still prayers and God's still listening. But why aren't we praying things that are so ridiculous that we know absolutely cannot happen? Right now, my grandmother has Alzheimer's, and she is definitely on the downhill slope, and she will be gone very soon. But I think about that, and I think about the fact that there is no cure, and it's a degenerative disease, and once it starts happening, it just starts happening, and it will get worse, and it will get worse, and eventually she won't wake up. But I think sometimes we're called to pray ridiculous prayers. Something that's so far outside of our comfort zone, something that's so ridiculous that we know will not be answered, but yet God's like, why not? I made the sun stand still. I made the earth shake when my son died. He's back from the dead. He's risen again. Why can't you trust me with these things? Yeah, you know it can't happen on your own. You know it can't be explained by science or anything. Yet why don't we pray these things? I mean, I think it's a direct reflection of who we believe God is. Our prayer life is a direct reflection of who we believe God is. If you're praying things like, God, I just pray that I get paid on time this week so that I can pay my bills on time this month. It's a good prayer. Why not? It's fine. But why not pray, God, I could use some more. God, I could use some more time in the day. God, I can use some more of my own resources, my time, my money, my car, whatever it is, God, to serve your purpose more. Give it to me. And who knows, maybe there's that one work meeting that serves absolutely no purpose. Anybody have some of those? Right? Where you're like, why am I sitting here? Who's talking? I don't know you. Like, this is a video conference. I should just like pause myself, like, or do like a loop of just me nodding, like, gotcha. Maybe it's something like that just gets eliminated from your schedule, and then God's like, hey, you got an hour. Do something with it. Come serve out in the parking lot at our food ministry. Come to the church and help out. Maybe go visit that neighbor who doesn't have anybody visiting them. Maybe go to the nursing home where they have some people who don't get any visitors, and they're shut in, alone by themselves. Whatever it is, I think we're called to pray something so crazy and so insane. And I was telling Pastor Fred this last week, for some reason, recently I've had people ask me, why isn't the church growing bigger? It's a pretty old church, and why aren't there more people here? It's been around for a long time, and Pastor Fred and I have our own answers for that, I'm sure. And not for sure, I know for sure, because we talk about it. But I think sometimes my ego gets a hold of that. And sometimes my prayer does get very crazy. and insane, but it's not for God's purpose, it's for my own purpose. And sometimes I'll sit there and I'll hear these things and I'll find myself praying, God, I just pray that this would just grow, that we wouldn't be able to fill this whole space. Like we could fill this whole space of building, and yet it still wouldn't be big enough for us, and that we're going to grow even bigger than that. We're going to take over, next door, and we're just going to move, and God's just going to do something great. And we're going to have so many numbers, and we're going to have so much crazy amounts of ministry that God's just going to move. And then I find myself looking back and saying, why? Like, there's nothing wrong with growing big. There's nothing wrong with getting more numbers, because God knows that you can do more with more numbers. But I think my prayer has changed this week when I'm studying this passage, saying, God, grow our influence in this church. Not for me. Don't grow my influence so that I get the praise. Grow our influence so that when we do something in this church, people look at it and go, there's only like 140 people there. How are they serving thousands of people a week? How are they ministering to all these people? And the only way they can explain it is saying, God's doing something there. God, grow our influence. Please allow us to be bigger than we are. I think our prayers just need to change just a little bit. Anybody else like me where you're praying about me all the time? God, help me. God, do this for me. God, speak to me. God, do a work. Bring a miracle, whatever it is. And instead, I think sometimes God just wants us to pray for things that He's already promised to us to be fulfilled. And I don't know what that is for you. And that's why I have 6 questions. What's God doing in your life? What is your purpose? It's amazing that in 2 Corinthians, Paul is talking about Jesus, and when he says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And then Paul says, I delight in my weakness, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Isn't it amazing that in our faith, we believe that in our weakness, God moves in power? Joshua has zero help at this moment. Once the lights go out in the day, Joshua and his army are done. Because they don't have electricity, they don't have street lights. When the lights go out, when the sun goes down and it gets dark, it's dark. I don't know. We live in a city. I grew up in the boonies, in the middle of nowhere. So when the moon wasn't out and the sun went down, the only light you literally had was the stars. And it was just like, sometimes you just can't see in front of you, and you're just like, what's going on? That's what it's like back then, because imagine no light pollution at all. The armies would have just gotten away. But Joshua says, God, in my weakness, I can't do anything right now. I am at your mercy, God. But you promised me something. You told me something would happen. So if that can happen, you have to do this, God. And he does it. My last point is this. After a miracle, are you willing to do the work? Because that's really what it comes down to. If after the miracle, after God does whatever you're asking for, and I pray that this week you start asking some crazy prayers. Like something so ridiculous. Like, God, I don't just want the next position above me. No, I want the next job. And not just so that I get the pay raise, because that'd be cool too, but also I want to be able to influence people in a godly way. I want to change the toxic environment that I'm in currently at my job, and I want to change it for the better. So the only way I can think of doing that is getting to the top and saying, God, let my heart, your heart that you've put in me, Lord, let that just filter down through everybody else. Change it from the top down. And Lord, if not that, then let the person at the top be changed by who I am and the way that I work and the things that I do. Allow them to see something different in me. Because if you're not willing to do the work, then why pray the prayer? That's just stupid. That's like buying something on Amazon and not using it. It's like, oh man, we just bought a Nintendo Switch. Anybody have a Switch out there? No one? Oh, yeah, buddy. The youngins. Nintendo Switch is a gaming console in which you can play Mario Kart. If you don't know what Mario Kart, you're way too old to understand this. It's a game where you drive carts on paths. So we got it because it was a nostalgic feature for me. I remember playing it as a child, but it would be like me paying all that money for that thing and then just looking at it and being like, wow, cool, let's look at this. It'd be like buying a car without driving it ever. I never understand that. There were some old people in my church growing up who had these like nice cars, like old cars they've spent hours remodeling, doing, and they never drove it anywhere. They put it on a flatbed truck to take it to an event, and they just set it down. They're like, you want to start up? No. This is a 70-year-old car. If I turn it on, it might turn into dust, right? It'd be the same principle. There's no purpose in asking for a miracle if you're not willing to do the work that it takes to get the miracle done. Because God has said something to you in your own life. He said, I have already given you the ability to do this. I've already delivered it to you. I am bringing you this beautiful package, and all you have to do is unwrap it and use it. And a lot of us just sit on our butts all day. I'm like, wow, man, God, I just wish you would do something. And God's like, I wish you would do something. I truly do. And I think sometimes that's the biggest like hindrance in my own life, is that I want the miracle and I want these things, but I know that it can't be done. I can't do that. There's no way. That's impossible. Literally, it is impossible for that to happen. So instead of being proactive and making it possible, I sit down and just wonder, man, what would it be like if that happened? What would it be like if God grew this church's influence so that when people are in need, the city looks to us rather than to some government agency? What would it be like for our church to care for more people, 10 times more people than we have here, if we can care for that many people out on the streets or here in Tustin? What would it be like? It's impossible, though. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the space. What would it be like? I mean, because I truly believe that God is in the mindset of answering prayers. You want to know why I think that? Because Jesus taught us how to pray. And he's in the business of prayer, and he's in the business of equipping people. Jesus sent out his disciples on their own so they could perform their own miracles, so that when people saw it happen, they would look and be like, these are fishermen. These guys suck. I hate these guys. They smell, they stink, they're weird, they don't talk to anybody but fish. And Jesus is like, go out and do these miracles, and people are going to be like, what? And the only explanation as to why they can do these things is because God has influence in their life. What can God do through you? I'm just an ordinary person. There's nothing extraordinary about me. I have no extraordinary athletic skills. Zero. I can do things, but I can't do them well, right? I play music, but I can't be a performing artist. I'm not going to go on tour. But what can God do in my life? What is it that God's doing in your life? And some of you are older, and I get it. But I think God does not care about your age or your situation, how young or old you are, how much money you have in the bank, how much influence you have now. Why? Because in your weakness, it says in the Bible, in your weakness, God is going to perform perfect power. I think that's incredible. So my encouragement to you is, what is going to stand still in your life? What is the miracle that God will do? And the only way that God's going to do it is if you ask for it to happen. There's no other way. I mean, God will do something because he wants it done. But how's he going to get the glory unless you give it to him? I mean, the sun could stand still today and we make some scientific understanding of why it stood still for an extra hour. Without someone praying the prayer and asking God, there's no glory for him. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to go and be disciples of all nations, teaching people His word and then training them to go out. So I encourage you this week, look at the fruit in your own life. Look at the things that God has been doing in your life. And if it's rotten fruit, cut it off, get it out. Start praying prayers like, God, I need something done. I need your power to move in my life. I don't just need my bills paid right now, God. I need security and I need a job and I need something to last longer than just moment by moment, God. I believe for that. Whatever it is, God is going to move in your life, and it's not a guarantee that these things are going to happen, but God will start providing for you. And sometimes I think we don't know God is providing for us because we're not listening or we're not paying attention to what we're saying. Lord, please help me today. Get through the day. Amen. And then God helps you get through the day, and you're like, next day, God, help me get through the day better than yesterday, because yesterday was terrible. Right? Appreciate the moments that you have with God. Appreciate the things that God has done in your own life. And then just pray some crazy prayers. Because God is not above or below answering those, as we see in this book. If you think the Bible's boring, you're boring. Because there's some, just in what we read just now, a hailstorm came down and destroyed an entire army. And then the sun stood still. So if you need more than that, I don't know what you need, but you need help. So let's pray some prayers this week. Let me close in prayer. Heavenly Father.